Hello, hello. The title says Betting on Sports, the biannual trip to Atlantic City story. I will try to tell this story as best I can. It's one that I've told many, many times, and for some reason right now I just feel a lack of preparation, probably because it wasn't the original intention of this stream. My intention was just to give an overview of how much betting I have done since they have legalized sports betting. But I thought I would take this opportunity to go over some of the history of sports betting in my life. And I recently had an opportunity to uh, take a master class with Peter King, who's a writer for Sports Illustrated, and it ties into this story of betting on sports and my biannual trips of going to Atlantic City. So when I was young, I would take biannual trips to Atlantic City that would coincide with the baseball and football preview issues of Sports Illustrated. So one would be around April and one would be August. So the one in August always synced up with my father's birthday, who was born in August, and we would go, towards the end of the month. And football was typically the first Sunday after Labor Day. So that was typically the start of the NFL season. And I think since they've changed the 17-game schedule, they might have changed the start. I know the season goes like a week later, and the Super Bowl is about a week later than it typically was. Typically, it was like February 3rd. Now it's around February 10th, I believe. And the start date might be sooner because now they have Thursday night kickoffs. And one of them, remarkable, one that stands out is the Patriots and Steelers circa 2015, and I'll maybe discuss that later on. So the summer trip always coincided with the football preview issue. The other trip might have been in the winter, but typically it started. Typically it was with the start of the baseball season. And since I was going at an age younger than 21, I was too young to gamble, so I didn't have much to do on these trips. So my father would bring. My father used to get magazines for his job, and when he'd come home late at night, he would bring home what he called junk, and it would be People magazine, Entertainment magazine, Motor Trend, and he would also get Sports Illustrated. Now, I never read People magazine. I would read Entertainment magazine. I was interested in like upcoming movies. I was interested in the ratings for television shows. Monday Night Football or Sunday night. One of the primetime football things was typically number one with like 20 million plus viewers. Eventually, shows like Game of Thrones and Walking Dead dethroned it, which I guess was remarkable. I was interested in CD sales, so in the day of Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, if they dropped an album, they were selling like 3 million copies the first week, and so I was interested in album sales. They also had domestic box office, and it was something to read when you were on the toilet. I guess we would keep in the downstairs bathroom, and my parents had a little magazine rack down there with things like Red Book and Home and Garden and Entertainment. And the other one is Motor Trend. I like to tell the story where my father would bring home Motor Trend, and I would see these pictures of Ferraris and Lamborghinis and cars that cost, $250,000, and they were nice to look at, but they were never like an attainable goal to me. I never, was motivated to make millions of dollars so I can afford a Ferrari. I felt that these cars were reserved for celebrities, movie stars, athletes, musicians, and I had a trajectory towards a career in medicine where I would likely take over my father's private medical practice, and they were just nice to look at. They weren't motivations. I wasn't financially motivated to pursue these things, and So then Sports Illustrated, I would read different things. I remember reading about Greinke when he was on Kansas City, how he had social anxiety, and that was one of the reasons why he didn't want to go to a big market team such as New York. I'm not sure if he played for Los Angeles. I don't know if that's not as, media exposure as New York, or if maybe it was just an excuse for that he didn't want to play for New York, or potentially he resolved some of his issues. Um, I shouldn't say the word issues. His, he managed his anxiety differently. Um, and for some reason, that's the only. I remember, reading about Captain Redass and the 2006 Mets. Um, there have been. I've certainly have read these things. I was never into like Life of Riley. He's one who wrote the column at the end of Sports Illustrated, and it was typically like humorous. I believe he moved on to ESPN, um, but the quality of writing in Sports Illustrated was typically seen as superior to ESPN, which I used to get ESPN as well later on, and it's this big bulky magazine, and it seemed more marketed towards like kids or something, even though I think they had an ESPN Kids magazine. Um, and they had the bodies issue, and Sports Illustrated had the swimsuit issue, which I was never interested in. My father would come home on occasion, and be like, "Look what I got!" He's got the Sports Illustrated, swimsuit issue. And at this point in my life, I guess I was exposed to porn. There's tons of nudie pictures on the internet. The Sports Illustrated issue is not a big deal. I used to get Maxim magazine, and yes, they have beautiful women in underwear and stuff, but Maxim also had some interesting pieces on. They had an article about the soccer team in Iran or Iraq, uh, where they were basically torturing players to to compete with the United States, and they had some interesting stuff on the advancements of medicine, where they could have like mesh muscle in the future, and basically with all these technologies you can live to like 140 years old, and because we wouldn't have to be concerned with deteriorating muscles and organs. And they had articles on different technologies like CD players, MP3 players at the time. um, so it was more than just attractive women, but of course there was some appeal. I remember um, once I was moving a bed in my room, and my uncle came across my collection of, FHM and Maxim and whatnot, and I think he remarked like, I found his jerk off magazines or something. Again, not something that, again, we had the internet, and although I have entertained this fantasy recently, where I was considering becoming a sex therapist. I have contact hours in human sexuality, and I was entertaining um, resurrecting Maxim magazine under a new type of format that also has like an online component, and basically becoming a sex columnist. And there's also there are like sex columnists in Cosmo and stuff, and kind of synchronizing it or pairing it with a show that was featured on Playboy TV. So I used to have DirecTV, and they had a television channel, Playboy TV, and there's the bunny that cooks food in between shows. There's naked yoga, um, and there's also this couple that goes around testing like sex toys and stuff, and sex shops and whatnot. And I entertained a fantasy where my partner and I, who's a peer, um, where we go into the field of sex therapy together, and we engage in sexual relationships, testing different technologies, um, you know, some sort of, maybe she gets a molding for like fleshlight, or we try different vibrators and bondage things and auto blow things, and so I know Maxim magazine still exists, but I don't think it's I saw it in the Barnes and Nobles recently, and it didn't look like it. Didn't look like Lauren German on the cover. In underwear and stuff. I don't know why her name came to mind, but it looked like maybe like Cardi B was on the cover and she was fully dressed, and potentially it became a different type of magazine or something. Um, but anyway, back to Sports Illustrated. So I was basically telling you that my father would go to work and come home late at night, and he would bring home what we call junk, which is those different magazines I had mentioned. And so on Friday, this was no different. And that's the day we would leave for Atlantic City, where he would go to work at like quarter to 10 in the morning. He would come home a little bit earlier. Typically, his days are from like 10 to 10, where he goes to work at a quarter to 10 in the morning to start his office hours at 10, and he might come home between the hours of 10 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., maybe sometimes even later. Um, but on days we would go to Atlantic City, um, he might come home at like 6:30, where he closes his office at 5, and he might spend an hour and a half doing some paperwork and stuff, and then he comes home, he gets changed, and we get prepared to leave for Atlantic City, where we might be leaving around 7 or so to get to Atlantic City around 10. So he would bring with him these Sports Illustrated baseball and football preview issues, and when we arrived at Atlantic City, I would read these things, whether it be immediately upon our arrival, because typically when we arrived in Atlantic City, um, we would meet up with my grandfather, who might have a suite. Early on, he was a high roller, and he would get comp suites. Later on, he wasn't as big of a high roller, and he would just get, regular rooms. So we would meet up with him and his live-in girlfriend, Marion, and we would have our sandwiches. So we would get sandwiches from Village Market. Typically, we would get Italian Heroes with dressing on the side, and I might eat some of the sandwich in the car and then finish it upon arrival in Atlantic City. And we might stay at, originally we stayed at Harrah's, and then we moved on to the Showboat. My grandfather might stay at the Taj Mahal, or the Taj Mahal and Showboat were right next to each other. They were connected. One is part of the Caesars group, and the other one's a Trump hotel. We also stayed at Trump's Castle, which was always entertaining. Um, that became Trump's Marina, and then became the Golden Nugget. I don't know what it is now. It's probably still the Golden Nugget. Um, but we would meet up with my grandfather. My parents might. I don't. I don't think they had drinks, but my father would always bring like his gin kit for Tom Collins. He would bring a shot glass, Bombay gin, and some Canada Dry Tom Collins mix. And so the first day we would go there, they would go down to the casinos late at night and play, gamble for maybe a couple hours, and then come back to the room and go to sleep. So for me, the first day was basically travel. Um, the second day, we would go to Ocean One. So if we're staying at Harrah's or Showboat, or Trump's Castle, we go to the valet, pick up the car, and we drive to Bally's. Bally's is right across the street from Ocean One, so we would park at Bally's and then walk through the casino, and then we'd go to Ocean One. And they used to have the fudgery, and they used to have, um, like a sports store that I might visit. They had an arcade and whatnot. And this is where I would get kind of like most of my activities done on these trips to Atlantic City, would be at the arcade. And they had like a shooting gallery where, in addition to arcade machines such as House of the Dead, I don't know when that one came up, but I would play Area 51 maybe some sort of fighting game like Virtua Fighter, or I don't know if I really, like I like Mortal Kombat, but I don't know at what age I started playing Mortal Kombat. But they had like a shooting gallery where you get, some sort of like airsoft type gun that didn't actually shoot pellets. It shot like a laser, and when you pulled the trigger, it might shoot air. And They had a Mrs. Fields. And after that, we would go back to the room, and we would, my parents might have their drinks, this Tom Collins mix, or we might just sleep and, rest before dinner time. At this time, I would typically read the Sports Illustrated baseball and football preview issue, and here's the point of this story right now. I remember reading these things and I had a desire to become as good of a writer, but a stronger, better predictor than Sports Illustrated. So I had strong analytical skills at the time. I was advanced in math and science, and like in math, I scored hundreds and 97s, 98s, 99s, and I was doing logic things that that they would test Microsoft employees and stuff, and I was getting A pluses. Speaking of incursions, A minuses is floor. Like I said, I scored nothing lower than a 95 in math. And this was remarkable because when I took the Regents, I scored a 90, and I said, "Gee, that's low compared to what I was doing in class." And it turns out that my teachers, I guess, grade the Regents, so I wonder if there was an error, because my in-class work was, I was no, I never scored anything lower than a 95, and I would score hundreds. I had multiple hundreds, high 90s, maybe got one question wrong on an exam or something on occasion. So when I look back on my 8th grade report card, it doesn't reflect that grade. So I wonder, am I in a different timeline? Because there's another thing that doesn't reflect my grade. That's the SAT. And that's a discussion for another day. So I wanted to become a better predictor. So in football, I think I was. I started working on power rankings at a very young age, and it was around the time that Mark Brunell and Fred Taylor were on the Jacksonville Jaguars. I forget is it Jimmy Smith, one of the wide receivers for the Jacksonville Jaguars? I remember being fairly accurate with my predictions, and I did all the teams, including, the basement dwellers. In more recent years, I find the most difficult part is not picking the best teams, it's picking the worst teams. So like I see people do their power rankings, and let's pick on the Cardinals and the Raiders, who, might be, cellar dwellers and stuff. Which one's 30 and which one's 29, and I guess there are 32 teams now or something, but, it becomes, I think, more difficult to differentiate the bottom teams versus the top teams. And potentially relevant when, determining strength of schedule. But potentially not, because maybe top teams just mop the floor with those bottom teams anyway. So being a sports, I never described it as being a sports journalist, but that's kind of like what I wanted to do, where I wanted to basically have a sports column to inform sports bettors, where John Heyman used to work for Newsday, and every week they have the predictions for football, and you see these guys' records where, out of 100 games, they might have a record of 40 and 60, and they're telling you, and their best bets are like, let's say at week 10, they're 3 and 7 or something. Like they have losing records, and their little article is to inform bettors. And basically, the way I felt about these articles or these paragraphs were, these weren't, prediction based. These weren't demonstration of the writer's prediction skills, they were a demonstration of the writer's writing ability, where basically they were just getting their paragraphs in to look for another job. So John Heyman, I think, moved on to CBS Sports, and I don't know where he is now, but he might be, somewhere in the NFL or something. I don't know why it's coming to mind that he might be part of, Football Night in America or something. Um, so I wanted to get on. I wanted to be a strong writer, just like they were in Sports Illustrated. As far as the predictions, I feel with football, I was unbiased, impartial, and able to predict fairly accurately. There are some that stick out. Some of them, one of them that sticks out in particular is the Packers over the Steelers, because it's the only one that Sports Illustrated and I agreed on, and we both got it right. Um, Another one that sticks out to me is after the Giants beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl the second time, I picked the 49ers to beat the Ravens, where I had the 49ers ranked number one going into the following season. ESPN had the Giants ranked number one going into the next season, and the Super Bowl turned out to be Ravens and Niners, with the Ravens winning. And another one is a midseason prediction where after the Seahawks signed Cliff Averill, I thought that they were, you know, Super Bowl favorites in the 2013 season, I guess, where they played the Super Bowl in 2014, and around November, the Cowboys were playing the Broncos, and I told my father basically to take the Cowboys, and he took the Broncos, and then the Cowboys didn't cover, and my uncle liked to throw jabs at me. He's like, "How come you didn't tell us about the Cowboys?" And I told my father, I said, "How come you didn't go with the Cowboys?" And he's like, "Oh, I feel good with my bet. Like the Broncos are unstoppable. Like their offense is a juggernaut. Like who's gonna stop them?" And I said the Seahawks by 35, and the Seahawks beat the Broncos by 35 in the Super Bowl. And I think had the Niners faced the Broncos in the Super Bowl, they also would have won the Super Bowl, but not by 35. The reason why I think that matchup was a strong one was because the Seahawks had a pass rush that could get to Peyton Manning. If Peyton likes these three-step drops and quick releases and stuff where he throws into flats, so I felt the flats were covered fairly well by the Seahawks defense, and if he's going to throw the ball deep, now he's going to have more pressure from that offensive line, that defensive line, and he's got to deal with Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas. Is it Earl Thomas? Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank on the Legion of. I just had this discussion recently, and I felt that C.J. Anderson had a lot of garbage yards. He might have had like 1,400 yards rushing that season, but I felt a lot of the Broncos' points and yardage were garbage time things, where they were just piling up later on. And later on, I would defend C.J. Anderson, where the Rams played the Patriots in one of the biggest duds of a Super Bowl ever, and Todd Gurley was ripping off for like 15-yard runs every once in a while, but they didn't lean on the run. They went pass-first offense with Jared Goff in the Super Bowl, the Rams, and I felt I guess Gurley might have been hurt or something, but I think had they had used C.J. Anderson, he would have been able to peck away at the Patriots defense, and that would have opened up the passing game for the Rams. So, so I basically thought of using like an accounting degree to become, to improve my analytical skills, to become like someone who could set the spreads for football. So my father typically bet the spread, not the money line. If you're unfamiliar, money line is just basically betting on who's going to win, and it's set in a way where one team is favored and one team is the underdog. A team that's favored at, I think it's plus, is for the favorite. So let's say they're plus 500. That means for every $500 you bet, you can win $100. So in order to win $100, you have to bet 500. And if a team is minus 500, if you bet $100, you win 500. So that's the money line, and that's basically, who wins. So if the underdog wins and you have them at minus 500, if you bet $100, you win 500. Now the spread is a team that's underdog will get points. So they can lose the game, but you can still cover your bet. So if a team wins 30-27 and you bet the underdog and they're plus 7, you won 34-30. So my father would typically do that, and basically I thought of, potentially getting an accounting degree to, set the spreads, work at Westgate or something. And the only thing is, I didn't want to, I didn't want to go for a degree in accounting because I didn't see sports journalism and this thing as a realistic career goal. Um, and As far as accounting, I stereotyped it where people who get accounting degrees work at H&R Block and they do taxes. So they work once a year and they work in a cubicle, and that wasn't appealing to me. So I crossed accounting off my list early on. Hindsight's 2020, it's a stable job and it has a decent income. Probably would have been a good career, but I want meaning from my career. I want something where this is going to be something I can take home, improve on, and it will be my golf game. Like this is something that keeps me entertained and combats boredom, in addition to providing meaning and also stability and a salary that can provide for a family. And that was always my intention, to provide for a family. So I was led to believe that you're going to make a certain amount of money to do that. And so now the other one is baseball. Baseball, I'm heavily biased towards the Mets. After the Mets went to the World Series in 2000, I went over the roster, and like everybody's going to hit, 300, everybody's going to have 20 home runs, and the Mets are going to, Mets are going to win the World Series and whatnot. And it didn't turn out like that. The Mets didn't even make the playoffs the following year. And they had a few seasons after, I think in '02, they were losers as well. '03, I think they got Vaughn. Mo Vaughn came to the Mets, and he was now there. They wanted to spend, I guess, like the Yankees. I don't know if he came in '02 or '03, but it didn't pan out. He had some memorable moments where he had like a 505-foot home run where he hit the Budweiser sign at Shea Stadium. That was exciting. I watched that game. I used to watch 162 Met games per year, and then watch baseball tonight to catch the highlights of the game I just watched. And then we got season tickets and whatnot. But so my predictions in baseball were not as good as they were in football. And the other thing is, like, baseball is hard to predict with injuries. You might have a team that's potentially a contender, but then your star player goes out, the beginning of the year, and you say, better luck next year. And that was, the story of the Mets' life, because every year David Wright was getting hurt. Every year, somebody was getting hurt. And they started blaming the conditioning staff. And, so So I was not as good of a predictor for baseball, but I was potentially more passionate about it. And I don't know if I wrote about it. My father has a book, I think K, where like after a while I said, I could write some of these books that are being published that my father reads for baseball, and I think I have more memories for baseball that are like emotionally tied. One that stands out to me, one of my first games was either against the Pirates or the Giants, where Barry Bonds was playing left field. My father and I are sitting in the mezzanine in left field, and my father, taps me and says, "You see that guy? You watch out for him. Like, he's good." And apparently, this is something my grandfather did to my father when they went to see the Yankees, and he pointed out Mickey Mantle. So I always had, an affinity towards Barry Bonds. I remember when he got his first All-Star Game home run in '98, and I remember, in '02 when, he went to the World Series, I was rooting for him. And then, when he broke the single-season record for home runs, it wasn't as exciting as '98. '98 was the greatest season in baseball history, at least as long as I've been alive. Um, but I felt that potentially he broke the record too soon. And I guess Barry also wasn't a favorite of the media. Um, I don't think it had to do with race, to be honest, but I'm sure people have thrown that out there. They don't, what they say in baseball? He's the greatest right-handed hitter. You know why? Because Barry Bonds is the greatest hitter of all time, and he's not in the Hall of Fame, and he's a left-handed hitter. So, it's true, it's true. So let's recap. Twice a year I go to Atlantic City with my family. Since I was too young to gamble, one of the only activities I could do was read the Sports Illustrated baseball and football preview issues where the sports columnists would write team synopsi and have predictions for how the seasons were going to turn out. Who was going to win the World Series, who was going to win the Super Bowl. I wanted to become as good of a writer as the Sports Illustrated people, but a better predictor. When I took courses at Seton Hall for graduate counseling, they welcomed Peter King to the campus, where students were allowed to take a master course with Peter King on becoming a sports writer. And Seton Hall also introduced hospitality law as part of their Seton Hall School of Law, which included sports law, esports law, casino law, gaming law, and some like Title IX student law stuff. And that was appealing to me, but I mentioned to my class while taking my graduate counseling courses, I said, it's interesting, I would like to take it, but for me, counseling psychology is my last hurrah at studying something meaningful to me. And sports betting was a huge part of my life, and for a majority of my life, it was illegal. And when I was considering applying to graduate school, it's something that I wanted to talk about because it's part of my identity. It's part of what shaped who I am. And but I couldn't talk about it because it was taboo. I would be incriminating my father. I would be incriminating my grandfather. I would be incriminating my cousins. And but yet it's central to my identity because it gave me something. It was a hobby that had a writing component where I applied to be a writer for the 49ers web cafe. So they basically, like Dan Graziano is a blogger on ESPN. He started writing a column for the NFC West. That's, I guess, where he got his start. But he might have started on like Bleacher Report or one of these team websites. And I thought of writing for one of those places. Also, I was interested in the math to it. So like fan graphs, and there were some statistical things. There's a website that uses a computer model to bet on sports, and they had something like a 700 winning percentage using this computer model for like 5-6 years, and then all of a sudden they had a losing record. They had like a 300-400 winning percentage. And I attribute this to fantasy sports, where the average sports bettor became more savvy. So Vegas became more stingy in their point spreads. So where it used to be easier for savvy sports bettors to pick games, now Vegas was more aware that the average bettor was becoming more informed, due to different exposures, potentially learning strengths through video games such as Madden, um, all the articles on fantasy sports, and just more attention to the games through more exposure via like Sunday Ticket in sports bars. So people who play fantasy sports might go to the bars and get more exposure to games rather than just their in-market games. So if you're in New York, you're only going to be exposed to the Jets, the Giants, and the primetime games. And Carmela, how are you? So I'm going to go to fanduel.com. Maybe I'll show this. Doesn't really matter. So we're on FanDuel. We're in New York here, so we're going to click New York. Now, when I was living in Colorado, it was actually legal in Colorado. So they legalized sports betting, I believe, in 2018, and I think the first state to ratify um, sports betting was Delaware. And I heard conflicting reports. So when they first said that on a federal level, sports betting was now legal, but I also heard a contradictory report that said, sports betting was not legal. And I don't know if that was why Delaware was so quick to adopt, the law, but New York was not a state that allowed sports betting, but New Jersey was. So my father, who once he has a patient who's a bookie, and he does like offshore betting. I was wondering, would he, as long as you had residence in New Jersey, would he, place bets on sports? Now, he used to pay for my sister's housing. Like, she had an apartment in Denville, and he would offer her some money for, I guess, utilities and stuff. And I guess technically he had residence in Jersey, but I guess, potentially my sister could just place bets for my father. Now, when I moved out to Colorado, I guess it was legal in Colorado, sports betting, so this is around 2018, 2019, but I never laid a single bet. So let me log in here. They're sending me a text message. Let's verify via email. I might have to go to Carmela, thank you. Carmela just hit the button there. That's why my mail just popped up. I get my mail forwarded, so it's not popping up. So I'm logging into my Comcast email directly. Seton Hall email forwarded to my iCloud email. Your security code. And we're logged in. Here we go. I agree to the terms and conditions. So, they're going to need to verify we're just here to show. This is my little logo. That's Sensei Matt. That's a little, view bounds details. So they have here your transaction history. I like FanDuel's logo better, so I preferred FanDuel. But there was also DraftKings, which I felt early on was the king of daily fantasy sports. We're going to use king because they're DraftKings. And I don't know how either company does now because the market's saturated with competitors, and I don't know how big sports betting is. I don't, they talk about how the revenue is like in the billions, but like, were they anticipating, revenue in the trillions type thing? Like, like, it used to be that they say like, date from must be within 2 years. They used to say like your betting all time is since 1969 or something. This is how much you bet. So let's do 2018. And then I'm going to go to 2020 because they're doing 2 years at a time. We can just do last year. Here's last year. I didn't bet anything. All products. Let's go to last year. Last year, 0. $2024, the date range. Let's try 2023 because I'm not sure. Since I haven't bet anything, I don't know if this is updating. So I guess February 21st, 2024 is the earliest I can do. So I can only go 2 years back. So why don't you just have the last 2 years? If I can only go 2 years back, why not just have last 2 years? Maybe there's a deposit history. No transactions match filters. Let's see if DraftKings has a different thing. I don't have a DraftKings account. No DraftKings account. All right, you want to see my email? This is my Comcast email.